Good evening to everybody. This is Thursday, June 9th, Fireside Chat with Lyndon LaRouche. This is Dennis Speed, and I want to welcome everybody here. There's a lot that could be said and will be said about where we are tonight and where we are in terms of our work. There's a lot that has happened. There's something most important that we'll start with, which is what our own organization has done in the state of New York in the filing of nearly 70,000 signatures for the nomination of Diane Sare to run as candidate for United States Senate against Chuck Schumer. We were challenged, and we are on the ballot. That is an achievement far more significant than the simple statistics of it might indicate. And it means that we have returned, in effect, to the arena of electoral politics in our own name and in our own way, from which we have been absent for many years. This is a significant battle, won against forces inclusive of those that were at one point inside of our organization, which had, for various, usually and largely cowardly reasons, given up that attempt to represent an independent voice intervening into the United States. That's what Lyndon LaRouche always was. And if anybody looks at the record of Lyndon LaRouche's interventions by means of his presidential candidacies, the 8 presidential candidacies, if you look at the record of that, you'll see that no matter whether Lyndon LaRouche was working with an administration, as in the case of the Reagan administration, or was vociferously opposed to an administration, as in the case of Bush 43 in particular, Bush 41, of course, he was not only independent, but was making proposals and critiquing matters of state in ways which made everybody uncomfortable, including his allies. That was something that, for various reasons, the organization found itself not doing in the recent years and is now doing once again. Now, that, however, has been noticed by persons in and around NATO institutions, in and around the City of London. They're not very happy about it, and we have to be aware of that and cognizant of that. There are things we're going to be asking of our network members in terms of their involvement with our organization, which are perhaps going to be daunting for some people and startling for some, but they're nonetheless essential. The world stands poised on a situation which is not understood by most of its citizens, and emphatically not most of the citizens of the United States. People are rising, wishing to not really see how extreme things have become. Those that went out to petition in the state of New York were confronted with the extremity, if you will, or this extremism of the circumstance that Americans find themselves in. People who had to or told us stories about returning food to the shelves in the grocery store because they didn't pay for it as they found as they brought their groceries up, or people that are unable to go to work because they can't pay for the gas. Not to mention many other circumstances which we could say more about. But if you take it at the international level, maybe the most colorful statement of this has been made by CEO of J.P. Morgan, Jamie Dimon, who talks about what he calls a kind of a clouds on the horizon which have become a hurricane. There's a reason he says that, and just to quote him, not that he's the big authority, but it's relevant to get an idea of someone who is a predator who is making it clear that he no longer has a handle on what's about to happen. He talked about the fact that the recovery in the United States, as he says, is huge growth in this country driven by fiscal and monetary stimulation. That isn't a normal recovery, okay, which means that there is not something that was done by American industry to create that recovery. Everybody knows what happened in 2020 and the fact that you had the entire American economy basically put on ice, something that had never happened really in history anywhere in the world, not in that form. and that the form of fiscal and monetary stimulation that's happening and was happening before that, going back to 2008, has not been natural. He said that physical stimulation, Diamond that is, said that physical stimulation is still in the pocketbooks of consumers. He said that the data is completely distorted. It's distorted by inflation. It's related. It's distorted by the fact that we have moved from goods to services. And he said that the Federal Reserve Bank has to now meet this massive inflation. I mean, after all, there was over $6 trillion pumped out on the economy between 2020 and 2022. And he says we're going to have to meet that with rising rates of QT. QT means quantitative tightening. You've heard the term quantitative easing. People really likes that. That's zero interest rates, even negative interest rates. And he says that that's now we have to meet that with QT, qualitative tightening. He said the QT, we've never had QE before like this. Therefore, we've never had QT before like this. So you're looking at something you're going to be writing history books on for 50 years as to what worked and what didn't. And then he talks about how negative interest rates is probably a huge mistake for a lot of reasons I won't tell you right now. He said, but I believe that the Fed will have to raise rates. They don't have a choice because there's so much liquidity in the system. They have to remove some of the liquidity to stop the speculation, to reduce home prices, stuff like that. One commentator, hearing him reference reducing home prices, said, that's a problem because a lot of people have been using their homes as piggy banks, as their own sort of private investment banks and leveraging funds and so on. And if you're talking about bringing down home prices, which of course you have to do, given the fact that home prices have reached absurd levels, that this will have other effects in terms of bankrupting or causing for defaulting on various other forms of debt. That's not Damien Diamond saying that. That's a commentator upon what he had to say. He talked about the fact that the people that normally buy treasuries, which were the central banks, foreign exchange managers, and others, that none of these are going to be available to buy U.S. treasuries. Let's also note that China and Japan are the two countries that have bailed out the United States between about 1997, 98, and now, over time. That's the secret of what happened to Japan's economy. And as, again, commentators have remarked, there's only been 2 times in history that this sort of so-called quantitative easing has ever happened. One was implemented by Japan, and the other is the one that was just done by the United States. But Japan did it because Japan was propping up the debt of the United States by purchasing treasuries. They have over $1 trillion worth of treasuries, closer, I think, to about $1.4 trillion, as does China. And so this process, and all of this is are all processes that Lyndon LaRouche warned vociferously against, particularly from 1995-96. They didn't stop them from being implemented, but now the bill is coming due. Diamond also otherwise talked about Ukraine, and he said this. He said, you have not had a European land war since 1945. And the complexity of Ukraine is that we do not know the outcome. He said, I always make a list of things to predict the outcome. Well, you couldn't predict the outcome of Vietnam or Korea or Afghanistan or Iraq or 10 other conflagrations I could cite. In every case, we were all wrong about them. Wars go bad. They go south. They have unintended consequences. And right now, this happens to be roiling the commodity markets of the world on wheat, on oil, on gas, and stuff like that. And he said that, in my view, will continue. He referenced the fact that he thought that oil would go to $175 a barrel. He said that won't happen in the short term, but it will happen over the arc of time. And he said that for all of those of you that are concerned about climate change, what's going to happen is at the point that oil begins to do that kind of somersault, poor countries are going to move to coal. So what you're going to have is you're going to have higher carbon dioxide emissions, not lower carbon dioxide emissions. Now, it's relevant not to go through him because he's an authority, but because of his punchline, which is nobody knows what's going to happen. I can't predict it. Nobody has any idea. Lyndon LaRouche built his organization and organized and factionalized for his organization by going around to college campuses back in the 1970s and talking about the fact that he could forecast that there would be a collapse of the then prevalent Bretton Woods system, which had existed from 1945-46. And Lynn went to different campuses challenging professors on that matter. And that's how he recruited the people that composed his original organization. He throughout his career, he insisted on his work as an economic forecaster as being the central thing that distinguished him and gave him the capabilities and the authority to be able to change society. So what Jamie Dimon is saying he can't do is exactly what Lyndon LaRouche built his entire intervention into the United States and around the world on. His various programs, whether they were about the International Development Bank of 1975 or the various programs, the 50-year development program for the Pacific Ocean Basin of 1982, or other such programs that he wrote, his draft program for Mexico called Operation Juarez, his programs for the United States of various types, and finally, what he did at the time that the Berlin Wall came down with defining what was called, first of all, the European Triangle as a way of dealing with post-Cold War Europe. That then evolved into the Eurasian Land Bridge, which became also known as the New Silk Road. And that was a proposal that we were circulating while he was in jail in the early 90s. To his 4 laws of 2016, the point was Lynn, insisted that if you can't do economic forecasting, you can do no effective human-based economic planning. So the circumstance that we're in as of tonight is that China and Vladimir Putin's Russia have a handle on this process, partially because of dialogue with the LaRouche organization going back to the period of the fall of the wall and subsequent to that, the dissolution of the Soviet Union. It isn't that all of their proposals came from us, by no means, but it is the case that a dialogue in which sometimes people often, by the way, disagreed with us, nonetheless allowed people to arrive at forms of intervention into world economy, which have now created a kind of firewall, not against the collapse of the transatlantic sector, but a firewall against the kind of full-scale, radical Malthusian depopulation that has been the policy of particularly the City of London and Wall Street. That is to say that the nations like India, nations like China, are not going to go along with that. Problem is that that's not good enough. You can't have simply a denial of the policy. You have to have positive solution, and that positive solution must also be embraced by the transatlantic sector, which is presently dominated by a leadership which is, at least the vocal leadership, is committed to its own self-destruction. The greatest destruction that has happened because of the sanctions policies has been of the transatlantic sector itself. What we've got to do is we've got to project different leadership that's going to actually, in fact, implement, or rather at least create the conditions for the implementing of Lyndon LaRouche's economic conceptions as stated in his 4 laws. There are co-thinkers of our organization in many different countries, but what's needed is to create a public, vocal, vigorous faction in the United States and in Europe. And to do that, we have to take back the electoral process, which has been usurped. We made a significant step toward doing that this week in the state of New York with the successful gathering of signatures and qualification of Diane Sare to be the United States candidate. Now, when I say we, I just mean her candidacy has done that. She's here to talk to us about that. But those of us who have thought about this and have been devoted to the ideas of Lyndon LaRouche, very happy about that candidacy. So, Diane, if you were there, please take it away.
Okay. Well, I'll tell you, the whole process kept bringing to mind this poem by Schiller. And if you don't mind, I'm going to recite a translation in English of Schiller's poem, The Glove. It's The Glove, a Tale. Before his lion court, to see the gruesome sport, sate the king. Beside him, grouped his princely peers and dames aloft, encircling tears wreathed round their blooming ring. King Francis, where he sate, raised a finger, yawned the gate, and slow from his repose a lion goes. Dumbly he gazed around the foe-encircled ground, and with a lazy gape he stretched his lordly shape and shook his careless mane and laid him down again. A finger raised the king, and nimbly have the guard a second gate unbarred. Forth with a rushing spring, a tiger sprung. Wildly the wild one yelled when the lion he beheld, and bristling at the look, with his tail his sides he strook, and rolled his rabid tongue. In many a wary ring he swept round the forest king, with a fell and rattling sound, and laid him on the ground, grummeling. The king then raised his finger, then leaped 2 leopards from the den with a bound, and boldly bounded they where the crouching tiger lay, terrible. And he gripped the beasts in his deadly hold. In the grim embrace they grappled and rolled. Rose the lion with a roar, and stood the strife before, and the wild cats on the spot, from the bloodthirst wroth and hot, halted still. Now, from the balcony above, a snowy hand let fall a glove. Midway between the beasts of prey, lion and tiger, there it lay, the winsome lady's glove. Fair Kunigund said, with a lip of scorn, to the knight LaRouche, if the love you have sworn were as gallant and leal as you boast it to be, I might ask you to bring back that glove to me. The knight left the place where the lady sate. The knight, he has passed through the fearful gate. The lion and tiger he stooped above, and his fingers have closed on the lady's glove. All shuddering and stunned, they beheld him there, the noble knights and the ladies fair. But loud was the joy and the praise, while he bore back the glove with his tranquil smile. With a tender look in her softening eyes, that promised to reward his warmest sighs, fair Kunigund rose her knight to grace. He tossed the glove in the lady's face. Nay, spare me the guerdon at least, quoth he, and he left forever that fair lady. And somehow this poem was in my head during this petitioning, and I think you know why, because the requirement, this 45,000 signatures, was like that, right? There's a Colosseum, if people had trouble imagining it, and you have a lion come in, and then a tiger come in, and then 2 leopards, which the lion and tiger devour, And then the lady throws her glove down between them and says, "Oh, if you really love me, get the glove." And the knight jumps into the arena, grabs the glove, throws it in her face, and says, "Forget it, not interested." And so, in a sense, this mission, it was absurd, it was sadistic, it was in the midst of what hopefully will be the end of a pandemic. The population was not I read in Crane's Business Weekly that the percentage of people in Manhattan who are back at work in their offices is 8%. So how can you argue you have the traffic flow to then triple the signature requirement when people also are still getting infected, and it's, rose again in the midst of petitioning with COVID. We had one person explicitly who got COVID while petitioning because of petitioning. We had people who could not petition because either they had been exposed, so they had to sit it out for a while, or because they live at home with someone who's vulnerable, who's elderly, who has various comorbidity factors that might make them very vulnerable if someone were to come in with COVID. None of this mattered. It didn't matter that, we can see with the petitioning process with what some people turned in, this farce called the Independence Party, which is nothing but the Republican Party under a new name trying to get a line. They couldn't come remotely close to getting the 45,000 signatures, but the head of the slate is a sitting member of Congress, Lee Zeldin. So how can it be that is a sitting member of Congress considered a frivolous candidate? They somehow got elected, but they were incapable of getting 45,000 signatures. So we did it, but in no way do I think that this should be a requirement. It was unjust. And what did we do during this? People know they worked hard. They put in long hours. We couldn't afford to not go out in the rain. You had to find a way to petition in the rain. The first day we started, there was a blizzard. I was in Buffalo, Rochester. We had not too many days of scorching heat, but a lot of days of rain and wind. We were told we couldn't set up at grocery stores because of the pandemic. Every kind of obstacle. And what we did was, in a way, to bring the voters back into the electoral process by defeating all the odds and successfully getting well over the 45,000 signature threshold to place my name on the ballot. And my candidacy was the only one that did not face any challenge. Now, I don't know if any of the others will end up being on the ballot. We'll see when we get the results from what happens with these challenges, but that's pretty amazing, and we should fight to reverse this because it's unacceptable. I could do nothing else during the time. I couldn't do a meeting unless I knew I had a capability of getting 100 signatures at it. It was all-consuming. And during a period when it would be much better to be focused on what's happening with the population, like the hyperinflation, the threat of nuclear war, etc. On that, what I want to add to what Dennis just went through is you have this incredible irony right now because these powers that be, the money bags, the bankers of the Great Reset, the World Economic Forum, the British Empire, they have been used to dictating to people for many years, for many decades, at least really since the death of Franklin Roosevelt, with a few brief intervals like the Kennedy presidency, certain things done by Eisenhower, what Reagan did with the Strategic Defense Initiative. There's been a few times where they haven't controlled everything, but pretty much they think that they can dictate to the world, including even over natural law or universal principle. So we heard when that the United States was going to put sanctions on Russia. First, we talked about doing it preemptively, that we were going to preemptively put sanctions on Russia to stop them from taking military action in Ukraine, even as we were arming and training members of the Azov, the Nazi Azov battalion in Ukraine, who had killed 14,000 Russian-speaking Ukrainians in the Donbass over 8 years. And we called this an unprovoked invasion. And then Biden gave a speech in Poland where he said that over years we want to destroy the Russian economy. And therefore we're going to put these sanctions on Russia. We're going to destroy the economy. Well, whose economy has been destroyed? Ours and Western Europe. And frankly, it's not even because of the sanctions. Only 3% of our petroleum came from Russia. So there's clearly something totally else going on, like the Green New Deal, and trying to get everyone to stop using fossil fuels that they never talk about, that is occurring. We're also going to have major disruption to our food supply. The U.S. is producing much smaller wheat crops this year, in part due to drought, because we're so busy spending billions of dollars arming Nazis in Ukraine, we can't possibly do anything about water management in the United States. And the idea that this is just about money can't be true, because if you think about it, the so-called military-industrial complex, the companies that produce the javelins and the whatever it is we're sending over there, all of these weapons, what happens with these? Well, they destroy buildings and things, and the rebuilding, I would say, is rather expensive if you're going to do that. Maybe we're not planning to do any rebuilding. And they also get destroyed. So you just keep spending money and building more. So, okay, the guy who owns the company, there clearly are some people making a lot of money off of this, but it's not anything that grows. Its net value is destructive. What if you paid those same companies to build the North American Water and Power Alliance, to build massive new irrigation systems to green the deserts of the United States, to drain the swamps, to generate hydroelectricity, to build nuclear power plants? Well, then wouldn't you not only be spending billions of dollars on these companies, they would make a good profit, but not only that, the profit would keep growing, because as the standard of living improved, as you had more power, more clean water at your disposal, you would become more productive. So you actually would generate greater prosperity by spending this money, even if it was on the same corporations using their technology to generate growth. So it isn't about money per se. It's about an evil ideology, which is the ideology of the British Empire, or as Lyndon LaRouche used to say, Zeus versus Prometheus. The Zeusian idea is that man is merely an animal, and there are hierarchical levels of man depending on your skin color, your bloodline, who your mother was, or whatever it is, that make you superior, how much money you have, how big your army is, and gives you the right to destroy other human beings, to treat them as dirt. That's the Zeusian view. And what was Zeus enraged about? That Prometheus gave fire, something which was only used by the gods, to man, and liberated man from a kind of slavery by giving man knowledge, so that man was able to transform its species into a higher order species through an act of will, through scientific discovery. So what Prometheus demonstrated, and that was really the United States, the Republic, which we should be celebrating in the year 2026. We should be preparing now for incredible celebrations of our 250th anniversary of our founding. But they're doing everything to erase from everyone's mind the goodness of our republic and what its intention was by convincing us instead that we're some excretion of the British Empire. So at any rate, this order doesn't work. And what these people have been trying to do to enforce their destruction, for example, of Russia, have totally backfired, and we are the ones being destroyed. And you see it now, I think, in extremely stark form in the nation of Poland, which has idiotically, probably under pressure, lined up with the British, with NATO, with Biden to participate in arming the Ukrainian Nazis and trying to have a war, an expanded war with Russia. And as part of their great effort to destroy Russia, they have banned all imports of Russian coal. So Poland now has terrible power shortages and energy shortages and fuel shortages. So the government has just decreed that the people in Poland can go into the forest and cut down trees and use wood for fuel. So their economy is going back 100 years. Poland is going to be like the nation of Haiti, which is burning charcoal for fuel. You have to think about that. That's the great benefit of working with the United States right now, is you can set your country back 100 years, and the life expectancy can go back to half of what it is, and the disease rate, because when you lower the standard of living so that you can't even cook your food thoroughly, and maybe you don't even have refrigeration, and maybe you don't even have enough food, guess what? You're going to get new diseases. There were studies done in South Africa on people who were infected with HIV, who then got infected with the coronavirus, and the rates of mutation of the virus were thousands of times greater than if the virus infected a healthy person. So when you have diseases infecting people who already have immune issues or who have underlying other diseases, or you have greater diseases, you're going to get a cocktail of things, not to mention who knows what's really coming out of the bio, as Victoria Nuland called them, bio-research facilities in Ukraine, which they moved into Ukraine because the kind of experiments they were doing are illegal in the United States. So we're in a moment where this question of justice, or to use another poetical image, Schiller's Erinyes, these screeching kind of angels of justice, will be landing, and we have an opportunity, therefore, to establish a completely different order along the lines of what LaRouche called for in his 4 laws, putting this Wall Street dictatorship in check, in service instead of humanity, with reinstatement of Glass-Steagall, shutting down the private Federal Reserve and creating a national bank, and directing credit into those activities that actually increase the power of man over nature. And we're really at a turning point, and I think the conference that Helga has called for, the June 18th and 19th conference of the Schiller Institute, is going to put this very squarely on the table. And we have a huge fight because many people are very upset with all of the things that they're going through and all of the hardships and difficulties, and they have a lot of complaints and a lot of frustrations, but there are very few people who actually consider what our planet should look like today, and if we make the right decisions, where we will be in 50 years or 100 years, and what will be the incredible relations among different nations and different cultures, where we realize the immense amount we can learn from the study of Tilak of India, or the study of Confucius from China, or consider the fact that algebra came from the Islamic Renaissance, or Ibn Sina, a whole different kind of relationship among human beings, because we're not going to be scratching each other's eyes out trying to get a diminishing amount of resources, but realize that there is something to be gained from the interaction of people who have different backgrounds, different cultures, and different contributions that can be made to solving the world's problems. So that's where we are. That's what I wanted to say. And again, that poem has really been on my mind for 6 weeks straight, so I'm glad I got to share it with you.